Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome back from spring break for those of you who are returning back from spring break. We are so excited to do this climate-friendly peer-to-peer learning session today. This session is going to be really focused on policy and advocacy opportunities. And as I mentioned, I think because we are a smaller group today, we're really hoping to use this session first and foremost to provide you some information on some of our state and federal policy work, but then secondly, to get your input and your feedback, because we would love to hear what challenges you all are experiencing, if there's anything we're missing, if you have any ideas or input. So we are definitely going to have a focused conversation today. And with that said, I will let you advance slide. So if you all could, I think we all kind of know each other in some way now that we've been kind of going to these sessions, but if you don't mind introducing yourself in the chat. I was getting hungry right before this call, so I decided to do, what is your favorite snack food? And if you could, Johanna, I like your face. I'm gonna just make everyone hungry with this icebreaker question. So if you could put in the chat what your favorite snack food is, that would be great. We are recording. The format of this session today, we will be hearing from my colleagues, Adrian and Chloe, who work on our policy and advocacy work for climate-friendly school food. So we'll be hearing a discussion or a presentation from them. We'll kind of stop throughout and kind of chat. And I think because, again, we are a smaller group, you can also come off mute if you have any questions or type any questions in the chat. We can kind of treat this as a conversation, and we'll pause halfway through the presentation to kind of check in with everyone and have a conversation together. And then after we hear the presentation, we're actually going to do something new today. We're going to get into some different breakout groups on like almost workshopping some different policy work and some questions that we have on our end. So it's going to be really kind of almost like a workshop is the second half of this call, because we want to hear from you and get your input around this. So with that said, I am looking through the chat. Everyone is making me so hungry. Thank you all for introducing yourself. And then the other announcement that I have before we get started is we kind of moved our schedule around because I realized that 2 weeks ago, everybody was out on spring break, or a lot of people were gone. People are emailing me saying, sorry, I can't attend. So what we decided to do was kind of shift things around a bit and move our leadership development session and also kind of incorporate that into a reflection on this peer learning series. Is this something we want to continue? What's the feedback from it? So we're going to kind of have that deep dive discussion on May 11th. So we kind of move things around. So again, we're keeping with that every other week on Wednesdays, and we would love to have you there. So next slide. And then final announcement, this is probably one of my favorite announcements, is we have another person that has joined our team. Reika has joined us as our new program intern. And so you may be receiving some emails from her or some information, and just wanted to introduce her in case you ever see her name pop up in your inbox. Reika, I don't know if you want to come off mute and just say hi to everyone.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and I hope we'll interact in the future, and I hope I get to know all of you. My favorite snack food is probably hummus and crackers, so fun fact. Nice to meet you all.
We are so thrilled to have Reika join us and keep us organized, so we appreciate that. And we've thrown her in by having her share this PowerPoint, so we appreciate it. And next slide. Yeah, okay, so without further ado, I'm gonna just turn it right over to my colleague, Adrian. And Adrian, I'll let you introduce yourself and kind of share a little bit more about all the work that you're doing.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I am Adrienne Busby. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am very happy to join you all today. I'm the Senior Food and Climate Policy Analyst with Friends of the Earth, and I'm a part of the Climate Friendly Food Program. I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful day here today, and I will be providing you with a brief policy update on what's happening at the federal level around climate-friendly school meals. If you have any questions as we go, please feel free to drop them in the chat or wait until we have a break. Otherwise, I can't really see the chat, so I'm going to rely on some of our other teammates or to some of my colleagues to let me know if there's anything outstanding. You may proceed with the next slide. So those federal policy priorities are composed of two parts: legislative activity in Congress and regulatory actions predominantly by the USDA. I will be touching on child nutrition waivers, child nutrition reauthorization or CNR, appropriations or funding of federal programs, and USDA updates to K through 12 meal pattern standards. Next slide, please. As you are all aware by now, the child nutrition waivers that were granted during the pandemic are set to expire in June. Although nearly 2,000 national, state, and local organizations, including Friends of the Earth, sent a letter urging Congress to extend USDA's authority to issue nationwide waivers for child nutrition programs beyond this school year, ultimately, the extension was not included in the appropriations package, and USDA does not have the power to renew. There is hope, however. Congress is slated to consider another COVID-19 supplemental relief bill. So there's a chance that these waivers might be renewed before the June expiration. We are keeping a close eye on this, and any updates on waivers or extensions will be widely circulated if and when they occur. Next slide. So the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act authorizes all of the federal school meal and child nutrition programs. Although most of these programs are permanently authorized, every 5 years or so, Congress reviews these laws governing these programs through the reauthorization process with an eye towards improvement and expansion. The House Committee on Education and Labor has indicated that they're well positioned to move forward with this bill next month. But unfortunately, the Senate has not been focused on CNR, and so it's possible that the bill will not pass this year. We are tracking this activity closely and using this time to bolster support from members of Congress for provisions that would support more plant-based foods and milk options in schools. These provisions are relate to the Healthy Future Students in Earth Act, equitable access to plant-based milk substitutes, and values-driven food purchasing in the USDA programs. I will speak on each of these in more detail. Next slide. So students across the country have been expressing increased interest in more plant-based food options in schools. However, school districts are working on a tight budget, often struggle to provide these options, partly because government subsidies favor industrially produced animal products. In response, Representatives Velasquez and Bowman introduced the Healthy Future Students in Earth Act in 2021, which would provide much needed financial support and other assistance to school districts to meet the growing demand for plant-based options. It would establish a $10 million grant program for school districts to apply for a 3-year pilot program to help them offer more plant-based entree and milk options to students. Specifically, it will provide funding for professional development, training for food service personnel on serving plant-based options, including preparing, procuring, marketing, and creating menus, technical assistance, pupil engagement, education, and plant-based food and plant-based options, as well as outreach to agricultural producers of meat alternates, including socially disadvantaged farms and local farms. School districts that serve a high population of food insecure students will be prioritized in this program. It's important to know that this bill is about expanding choices to meet the needs of our students and recognizes that school lunch can lay the foundation of a lifetime of healthy eating habits, thereby reducing diet-related disease. It's very powerful for members of Congress to hear from operators in support of this bill. So if anyone on the webinar is interested in meeting with a member of Congress or reaching out to your member of Congress, please let us know, and we'd love to help facilitate that connection. I'm now going to move on to milk and equity and pass it on to Chloe.
Thanks, Adrienne, and hi, everybody. It's good to see some familiar faces and many new faces as well. I'm Chloe Waterman, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for our Climate Friendly Food Program at Friends of the Earth. So Adrienne and I are work on policy work. So one way to think of our roles is you all, and through Emma and Nora's work, tell us what are the policy obstacles that you face in serving more healthy, climate-friendly school food. And we try to lobby for the solutions in that at both the state and federal level. So everything that you're going to be hearing about today in terms of our policy priorities is all about adding flexibilities for school districts and providing, new funding and voluntary new grant programs to support the work you're doing, except for this one. So this one, we are responding to a need that we've heard, particularly from our partners that work on the ground with students of color who disproportionately have lactose intolerance, like most people around the world, and aren't able to process lactose. So as you all know, right now, school districts are only required to provide a fluid milk substitute in cases where a student has a note from a doctor saying that student has a disability. So as you can imagine and probably have experienced, this can create a barrier for students who are low income, for whom it's challenging to go to a doctor, for whom a doctor wouldn't consider lactose intolerance a disability. That's not officially how that condition is classified. So what we are working on is making it easier for those students to be able to access a plant-based milk substitute. So what the language that we're advocating for in CNR would do is it would require districts to provide a fluid milk substitute to any student whose parent or guardian writes a note saying that they need that substitute. And it would also authorize school districts to provide a plant-based milk substitute to any student who wanted it, but would not require that. So say you're a school district and you actually can get a pretty good price on soy milk. You have a lot of students that are lactose intolerant. You could go ahead and just offer that soy milk right in the service line, and any student who takes that would be part of a reimbursable meal. But the only situation where you'd be required to provide soy milk or some other substitute agreed on by the school and the parent is if the student has a note saying that they have a medical or other special dietary need that requires a milk substitute. Next slide. Thank you, Rika. So another one of our objectives is around expanding what we call values-aligned food purchasing within the USDA Foods program. So one of the challenges that we've heard from districts is that you have all of this entitlement money to spend. Many of you have goals that you have around purchasing more local or purchasing organic, or maybe you have a policy around purchasing meat raised without routine antibiotics. But this stuff is typically not available through the USDA Foods program, or if it is, it's kind of like a coincidence that you're getting it. You can't know at the time that you're ordering if you're going to get chicken raised without routine antibiotics. So we've been working on this both directly with USDA. Many of you signed on to a letter that we sent them previously that said, at the very least, that said that all of you wanted more organic options, wanted more plant-based food options, meat raised without routine antibiotics, other higher quality meat. And so we are working with USDA to get that, but we're also working with Congress, and we have been working with the Education and Labor Committee on language that would actually require USDA to make available a variety of plant-based options and other what we call kind of values-aligned food options. They're listed here on the slide through the USDA Foods program. And I saw Kat put in the chat that cash and lieu should be an option, and that's one of the things that we love, hearing from you all. What are the alternative solutions to this? One of the other ideas we've talked about is something that's more like a commodity letters of credit, where if a school district is not able to source a certain type of food that aligns with the policy that you have at your district, then you should be able to buy that on the commercial market and then get reimbursed by your state agency. So those are some of the different solutions we're workshopping and just trying to see what we can get to stick between Congress and the Ag Marketing Service. Next slide, please. And then the last thing I'm going to share about before I turn it back over to Adrian is around this program called the School Pulse Crops Program, which you probably have never heard of, even though it has school in the name of it. And that is because this program was created by the 2008 Farm Bill, but it was never funded. So what the program would do if it is funded is it would give free pulses and pulse products as well to school districts to incorporate into menus. So again, since this was never funded, the program has not done anything, but that it does make it an easier path for advocacy in Congress because they don't have to create a whole new program. They can just, through their annual appropriations process, allocate. We're asking for $10 million for this program to provide free pulses to schools. And I will turn it back over to Adrian. Oh, wait. Oh, now we're in the discussion. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. So we want to hear from you all. What, so far, we still have to go through some of our other policy priorities on the regulatory side, but what are your reactions to these policy updates? And have you heard anything else in CNR or elsewhere in Congress that you think we should be tracking in order to help you all? USDA has a conflicting mission when it comes to the school meals program. It is both charged with promoting what is really now industrial agriculture in the United States and with having the best interests of our kids. And those things don't always go together. And some of these programs like the USDA Foods program have not been updated since 1945. And so, we don't have, we certainly have an uphill battle on some of this stuff, but we're still hopeful that we can make some incremental changes.
I just want to piggyback off of what Sally was saying and talk, what does the nut or the plant-based milks look like at an elementary school? How does that work?
Are you asking about kind of like what the laws currently?
All right, no, I'm actually functionally, do you have someone who's standing there pouring little portions of the nut milk? Are there the single-use cartons? I've not seen nut milks in school, so I'm curious how that pans out.
Well, part of that is because of the policy. So right now, schools are required to offer 2 different types of cow's milk in the service line, and you have to make sure nothing interferes with the sale of your cow's milk. So what this would do is, for the first time, schools would be able to, if they wanted, just put fortified soy milk right there in the line along with the 2 types of cow's milk. But that would be a change in the policy. School districts would have pretty much complete flexibility for the cases where it's students that have a parent or guardian that writes a note asking for a substitute. So for instance, maybe that is a student that is actually, that for that particular student, it's better for them to consume fewer calories. The school and that student could decide that student's substitute should just be water, and that student can get water from a water fountain that day. They might decide, the best option for this student is fortified soy milk, and the school district would be required to provide soy milk. They could do that. It's not prescriptive about how they do that. So if you just have one student, maybe you have a jug of soy milk and you are pouring a glass for that one student, or maybe you have single serving sizes. One thing on that first is I think maybe it was Sally or someone else pointed out, this is just all about choices, right? So if your school district did not want to, say USDA Foods did offer meat raised without routine antibiotics, you could still choose not to use that if you wanted to. So it's just about having that option available for school districts that would choose to order it. I would say on that point, what we advocate for is what we call, meat or dairy raised without routine antibiotics. And what that means is that small doses of antibiotics aren't given to the animal as a way of preventing them from getting sick to overcompensate for the fact that they're stuffed in there with so many other animals. So a cow would still get treated if that cow became sick. So for lines like organic, if you can't ultimately have, or if you have a no antibiotics ever line, what would happen to a cow that gets sick is that cow gets treated and can no longer be marketed as no antibiotics ever. And so you wouldn't get, you shouldn't get milk from a sick cow. In response to a couple of the things you said, we totally agree on the cost part of it. And when we proposed these changes to Congress, we also proposed that they allocate funding to school districts to compensate for the difference in price between soy milk and cow's milk. They didn't include that part or aren't planning to include that part of our suggestion, but they have indicated an interest in working with us through, again, the USDA Foods program to see if the USDA Foods program could begin to offer soy milk. And again, if the law changes, there would probably be more demand for that. But we do concede that this policy is not perfect because in the short term, it would be school districts that are on the hook for paying for that difference between cow's milk and soy milk, but just for the kids who have the note from their parent saying that they require that. It wouldn't be, so like you said, if one student sees another kid with oat milk and says, oh, I want that, they maybe could, but they'd have to have a note from their parents saying they have a special medical or dietary need that requires them to have an alternative and that alternative is the best for them. And then, we're somewhat restricted. So there's a federal law that says that the school meal standards have to be in alignment with the dietary guidelines for Americans, right? And right now, the dietary guidelines for Americans say that the only nutritionally equivalent substitute to cow's milk is fortified soy milk and fortified pea milk. And so right now, we're somewhat constrained that if this policy passes, those would be the options that school districts would be allowed, not required, to proactively provide in the line. But I totally agree with you. And I think it's something that if these policies change, hopefully the oat milk manufacturers would say, hey, I want to get in on this. I want to be in schools. I'll add some calcium. I'll add some vitamin B12, whatever it is that they need to be considered a nutritionally equivalent option for USDA. But yeah, thanks for all of those comments. I think I totally agree with you and admit the policy is not perfect for some of the reasons you shared.
It's funny. I feel like with the dietary guidelines and the meal patterns, this came up, if just to remind everyone, on our first session, I think, when we were talking about like implementing climate-friendly food, what are the challenges, what are the barriers? And I think like one of the first comments was USDA meal patterns. And so I'm really excited to be able to talk through this with everybody. And really have Adrian kind of walk through what we're doing on our end around the USDA meal pattern standards. So Adrian, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, before we jump to the meal pattern standards, I'm just going to briefly mention that the process for updating the dietary guidelines for 2025 has actually started. So the advisory committee for the DGA has actually requested comments on some questions to inform the next set of guidelines. If you have, and comments are due May 16th if there's any interest in either in participating or submitting any information. That's my one note on that, and we can transition to the next slide and talk about the update on the patterns. So as some of you know, the USDA actually issued a final rule on transitional standards that relate to milk, whole grains, and sodium last month. These are supposed to help schools move forward as they transition from the current pandemic operations towards more nutritious post-pandemic meals. So as far as the milk, whole grains, sodium update is concerned, schools now schools and childcare providers serving children 6 or older may offer flavored low-fat milk in addition to non-fat flavored milk. This is to compensate or to bolster in the USDA's reasoning calcium consumption. And so these have been, flavored milk has been allowed for that purpose. Relating to whole grains, at least 80% of grains containing at least 50% of whole grains are now required. So again, there's been a slight shift to help schools who might be having difficulty sourcing whole grains or whole grain products that comply with the normal or pre-pandemic standards. And then next, sodium. The weekly sodium limit for school lunch and breakfast will remain current for school year 2022-2023. But for school lunches only, there will be a 10% decrease in the limit for school year 2023 through 2024. The reasoning behind this is that this decrease will align with the FDA's recently released guidance that establishes voluntary sodium reduction targets for processed packaged and prepared foods in the US. It's important to note that all other nutrition standards, including fruit and vegetable requirements, will remain the same as the 2012 standards during this 2-year transitional period. Next slide. The department is also planning to conduct a more comprehensive rulemaking that will include a notice and comment period later this year in the fall to establish long-term standards that will align more directly with the Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2020, as we noted earlier in this during the discussion phase. These new rules that come from this notice and comment rulemaking will then go into effect for the 2024-2025 school year. So in anticipation of the USDA's fall rulemaking on these standards, FOA has come up with 8 recommendations based on stakeholder engagement that would allow for increased flexibilities around serving plant-based and plant-forward meals. The goal here is to provide school districts with more flexibility to serve plant-based entrees, which is crucial as school grapples with supply chain challenges and work to accommodate the growing demand for healthy, climate-friendly meals, as you know, so many of you have already pointed out. Next slide. So for context, the DGA notes that while youth meet or exceed recommended servings for meat, poultry, eggs, they are under-consuming vegetables and vegetable subgroups like beans, peas, lentils, nuts, and seeds, and soy products. DGA has also noted that there is a need for increased dietary fiber, and it's a public health concern. So these 8 recommendations that we have posted up here for your review are meant to support these increased flexibilities in the nutrition standards consistent with these dietary guidelines. And so I will go through each one and sort of explain the rationale or our thinking behind it. So number 1, allow beans, peas, and lentils, tofu, and soy products to qualify as MMA, even if not visually recognizable. The idea behind this is that there really isn't a rationale or reasonable explanation why blended or noodle-based, vegetable-based noodles can count towards the vegetable component, but bean-based pastas cannot count towards the MMA component. And so we really think that this flexibility will allow schools to offer pulses in forms that are attractive and familiar to students, such as plant-based pastas, burgers, dips, and pureed soups. The next recommendation is also around beans, peas, and lentils. And we are basically advocating that these pulses should be able to credit as both a vegetable and an MMA if served in sufficient quantities. And that the same pulse dish should be able to credit as a vegetable or as an MMA in a single day. The idea is that this would allow more flexibility in planning and offering fully reimbursable meals that are consistent with the dietary needs of our students, especially those who, for whatever reason, do not want to consume animal products. The third recommendation is really a more generalized recommendation. It's sort of like a catch-all in the sense where we're saying we need to diversify protein options by allowing more flexibilities to offer beans, peas, and lentils to credit as MMA, right? So the idea here is that, or what we've heard is that, when beans, peas, and lentils are served as a side, they're less likely to be consumed. But when they're incorporated into an entree, there's a host of different opportunities to make them very appealing. And we're really trying to move beans, peas, and lentils from the side to the center of the plate, right? To present them as an entree. And this would allow, more flexibility to diversify protein intake, which is consistent with the dietary guidelines. Excuse me. Number 4, enable quinoa and other complete grains that are not limited in amino acids to qualify as MMA. Essentially, what we've noticed is that there are like 1 cup of quinoa is equivalent to 8 grams, has 8 grams of protein. And that is more protein than some of the other types of food that FNS currently allows to credit as an MMA. We think that, this recommendation is really about increasing healthy, climate-friendly protein options that basically diversifying protein options as recommended by the DGA. There's other types of grains such as teff, buckwheat that can be incorporated and fits this qualification of being a complete grain. And so that opens up a lot of other options that currently aren't open to food service professionals right now. Number 5, to amend regulations to allow nuts and seeds to credit fully as an MMA. Currently, as you know, nuts and seeds can meet 1/2 of the MMA component, but must be served with another MMA to be reimbursable. But this isn't the case for nut butter. And so really the nutritional content of these foods don't really change when, let's say, a nut or a seed is blended into a butter form. So there's really no justification for this distinction that we can find. And so really we're saying that there should just be more consistency, and that, nuts and seeds should be able to count as fully as an MMA if served in sufficient and adequate quantities. Number 6, this one is more technical. So we're talking about enabling protein products to credit, enabling alternate protein products to credit if they include a minimum grams of protein. We've heard from many program operators that this process, the APP process, is very confusing, is difficult to manage, and it can really deter them from serving more plant-based options. Focusing on total protein content is simple, easier to understand, and achieves the goals of ensuring students are getting an appropriate amount of protein from the MMA component. We think this is something that could be easily reworked, but we wanted to get a little bit more feedback from you guys to see what other options there could be and whether or not this is a major concern for you guys. Number 7, we're advocating for creating more consistent and practical nutritional equivalencies for MMAs. We noticed that nutritional equivalency requirements for some plant-based foods are unnecessarily high to achieve the nutritional goals and do not need to be, and don't seem to be based on protein content. For example, tofu, to qualify for 1 MMA, you require 2.2 ounces of tofu. So to meet a full 2 MMA, that requires 4.4 ounces of tofu. We've heard from operators that that is a lot of tofu, even for the most tofu loving person. And so for one example, one operator who was trying to source tofu nuggets found that the vendors required or stated that they would be required to serve 10 tofu nuggets as opposed to 5 chicken nuggets. that's way too, more food than any student is used to seeing or would probably even want to consume. The same can be said for the nut butters, whereas 2 MMAs would require 4 tablespoons of nut butter. That's a lot for a sandwich, making it very difficult to eat. Basically, these equivalencies really do impact the taste. They make some of these foods difficult to eat, and they can lead to food waste. And so we're suggesting that, for instance, 1 ounce of tofu should qualify for 1 MMA, and so on and so forth. And finally, our final suggestion comes down to renaming the category, the meat alternate category. This, to what we haven't quite figured out or determined, but we do think that this creates a negative perception of plant-based sources of protein and does not align with the DGA, as meat alternate does not appear in any of the DGA guidelines, dietary guidelines. And USDA has already moved away from the meat alternate term when reviewing the USDA My Plate tool. They refer to it as the protein food group. And so this is also something that we would like to get your opinion on and your advice as to what would be a way to address this category, and what concerns you would have about renaming it or it reconstituting its composition. And so with those eight recommendations, and in anticipation of the fall rulemaking, we're currently circulating a letter advocating for some of these changes. And stakeholder engagement has already begun, and we've heard that FNS is drafting the proposed rule as we speak. And likely the proposal will be baked by the end of summer. And so accordingly, we've begun circulating the sign-on letter to USDA with our suggestions, which will be shared with you momentarily, and you will have the opportunity to review it and also share your initial thoughts and concerns with Chloe and myself during a breakout session. And so that will come later after this, but I do have one more next slide, to touch very briefly on.
Adrian, I did share it in the chat too. I just shared it with everyone, so people can get a head start on looking at it if anyone wants to.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. That's very helpful. Normally we would cover, I'm covering federal policies, but because, you guys are in California, we do want to just touch very briefly on California priorities. And I would say briefly that Friends of the Earth is supporting several bills and budget items in California, including a bill that would create a new grant program to support California's school in expanding plant-based and religious meal options, and budget items that would expand farm-to-school funding, kitchen equipment funding, and funding for values-aligned food purchasing consistent with the Good Food Purchasing Program. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask Nora or Emma, because they are a little bit more ingrained in the California policy aspects. But I'd be happy to assist it in any way I can. Next.
Yeah, if Adrian, if I can just chime in there real quick, I would say, this session today, we're really focused on climate-friendly meals, more plant-based options. We're talking about plant-based milks, et cetera. I would say that at Friends of the Earth, we're also, very supportive of increased reimbursement rates, universal school meals, anything that can help alleviate any of the labor or supply chain challenges that you all are facing. We definitely acknowledge that these are really big challenges for you. And so bills that do support that, we are definitely in support of as well. And this also relates to the farm to school work. We really think that this goes hand in hand to really enabling us you all to kind of serve climate friendly food. So those are all other policy areas that we do work in and we do fully support. It's just, for the sake of this webinar, we decided to kind of narrow in and really talk more about some of our climate friendly policy efforts.
Thank
So
you,
yeah,
Laura.
just wanted to like a quick aside on that.
No, thank you so much for clarifying that. I really appreciate it. So finally, we've reached the opportunities for participation. And so, our opportunities to take action. So for the meal patterns, as Nora dropped into the chat, to review the sign-on letter and to sign on to this letter to USDA, you may either review the letter at the link that Nora dropped into the chat and sign up by April 29th, which is this Friday, or you can email Nora for a copy of the letter and she can make sure you get that before the due date, which is I see is in 2 days. But but this is obviously something that we can discuss a little bit more in breakout sessions. So no need to jump on the link just at this moment. For CNR, if you're interested in writing a letter of support to your member of Congress or joining a Zoom meeting with your member of Congress to share your experience and support for any of these priorities, which includes the Healthy Future Students of Earth Act, milk equity, school post, that's appropriations. The school post prop program. You please email Joshua Phillips. His email address is there for you to get, is jphillips@fo.org. You can also email Nora and she will be happy to supply that email address to you if you are not able to get it right now. For opportunities to support USDA values-aligned food purchasing, you can email USDA foods at fns.usda.gov to ask for foods that you wish were available through the program. Be it minimally processed bean patties or anything of that sort. And then lastly, for the California legislation and budget ask, you can look up your state legislator and send an email asking them to support the AB Bill 558, the plant-based school food bill. And I do not have that link on me, but I believe if someone could drop that in the chat when you get a chance or follow up with anyone who's interested, that would be great. So this more or less wraps up my update. We hope that this was informative and we're going to move on to the discussion of breakout groups.
Yeah, so going back to our breakout group sessions, we are going to do something a little bit different this time. We are going to actually have 3 facilitated breakout groups. So Chloe will be facilitating breakout group 1, Adrian's facilitating breakout group 2, and Camila will be facilitating breakout group 3. And you can actually, this is going to be a moment where you can pick which breakout group you are interested in joining if there is specific topics that you are interested in. And so I'm going to let each of them, Chloe, Adrian, and Camille, kind of explain what their breakout group is about. Again, I would just, from a high level picture, really what we want to use this time for is to really get your input. There's, as Adrian was kind of going through, for example, the meal pattern recommendations, Adrian was kind of asking some questions like, what would we change what would the alternative name for the MMA category be? Or, just there's some questions on our minds that we really want to get your feedback. And so these breakout groups are going to be really facilitated conversations so that we can really hear from you on what your recommendations are, what your challenges are, and get your input. So with that said, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Chloe to pitch her breakout group.
All right. Thanks, Nora. So this group is going to be focused on 2 of the suggestions, the recommendations to USDA that Adrian went over that we don't quite have a solution to because they're really tricky. So we know we want to change the name meat alternate, but change it to what? Change it to protein foods group. Well, that's not a perfect overlap with the dietary guidelines. We also know we want to diversify protein intake and make it easier to serve plant-based options as part of entrees. how does that work? We know that most beans, peas, and lentils right now, from a practical level in schools, are served as part of the vegetable subgroup because you have to meet your weekly vegetable subgroup minimums for beans, peas, and lentils. What if that went over and that subgroup moved to meats, meat alternates? These are some of the thrilling questions that we will be discussing in breakout group number 1. So I'm calling all meal pattern nerds and experts to come over to breakout group 1. And if I'm alone, then I will leave and join Adrian's group. So Adrian, go ahead.
All right. Well, my group is a little bit of a mishmash or an overview. In a sense where I really want to get your input on all 8 of these recommendations. Which one of these are priorities for you and why? Is there anything that we're missing? Anything else that we should consider adding? Things that we should consider as rulemaking comes up in the fall? Any ideas, any feedback? It's really just a free-for-all. We'd love to hear everything you have to say. And if you do not join my group, I don't know what I guess I'll jump over to Chloe's.
And then we have Camille. Hi, Camille. Do you want to introduce yourself? I know you've presented before on the on our sessions, but we're excited to have you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Camille Biazzo. I am a registered dietitian, and I'm also the outreach specialist for the organization Balanced. It's a nutrition and public health nonprofit, so I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. So my section is all about dietary fiber, which is a little bit different than what most of today's conversation has been focused on, but it's a really great route to consider when you're thinking about increasing plant-based rich or plant-rich meals or healthy climate-friendly options. All those foods are really related to fiber. We know that almost all American children don't eat enough fiber-rich foods, so things like beans, legumes, lentils, whole grains. So we really want your feedback and input on fiber and regarding what you would think about how we can actually get students to consume more fiber. We know schools are doing a great job of offering fruits and vegetables, but how do we get students to actually eat it? So some of our questions that we might talk about during our session: would actually implementing a new dietary specification through the school meals, like sodium and calories, we already have that. Would having a fiber specification be helpful, or is that something you're not interested in? Really looking for your ideas as food service professionals on how we can really help students consume more of those fiber-rich foods. So hope you join me. If not, like Chloe and Adrian said, I'll just pop into a different session.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm sorry to, end our really awesome discussions. I know there was a lot of really good conversation happening, and so we did extend it a little bit longer, but maybe, I don't know if we want to just briefly have each group kind of share what was discussed. Group number 1, do you want to share what you all talked about?
Sure. Well, just for the sake of time, we had a really complex discussion that I don't think we could really summarize well in 1 minute, but I will take this opportunity, Nora, to thank the group and to say that if y'all are passionate about these issues, our next step, we have that letter on the meal patterns. And then after that, we're going to ask to meet with USDA about this and have another listening session. And if you all had such great comments in my group, I want to make sure, Rika, that you got the names of the folks who are in that breakout group, because I would love to call on you guys. And if you're willing to join that meeting with USDA and share some of what you shared with me about why you support which of the recommendations and some of your reasoning for that and how they would, in some cases, make your jobs easier. So thank you so much to Group 1 participants, and I'll pass it over to someone from Group 2.
Yes, well, I was fortunate enough to have Sally and Lucy in my group, and we were able, and as well as Bobby, and we were able to really, I guess, I was able to get a little bit more background as to how these patterns have evolved. But I really do think that the priority here is really trying to focus on the content of the food that we're serving, right? Not necessarily the food component itself. And so, focusing on creating more consistent practical nutritional equivalencies, as well as enabling alternative protein products to credit based on minimum grams of protein are really top priorities for our group. We really do want to focus just on the food itself and the nutrients that are provided versus meal groups. And so this has been very helpful to me and enlightening to me. And I think that Sally or Lucy or even Bobby as well, because you are not as you noted that you guys aren't able to scratch cook, and you have other concerns that some of these other schools, districts don't have. I think you can provide very good insight if you were willing to participate on any of these meetings with USDA as well. So I thank you guys all for a lively conversation and your energy and positivity, and I appreciate you all. And I'll pass it on to group 3.
Great.
For group 3, we talked about fiber, and I really appreciated the conversation that we had about school meal requirements, and if we are going to increase the requirement or add more fiber-rich foods to meals. We talked a lot about how important it is to ensure that kids actually have enough time to eat those meals. We had really great conversation around, like, what do school cafeterias look like right now with getting kids in, and how much time they have to actually sit there. What are we serving kids? Are we serving them whole apples or sliced apples or juice? So that was a really wonderful conversation. We also talked about how do we raise the bar instead of, like, if we keep adding more requirements like fiber, what about other things like added sugars? Like, what's the best approach? There are lots of different ways to address the quality of school meals. So really appreciated the conversations. We had such valuable experts in the room. So thank you for your feedback.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Chloe, I did get a question, and Carrie, thank you for raising this. If members of this group wanted to share the sign-on letter, are they allowed to share the sign-on letter with others? And then also, I guess a part 2 of this question is, Chloe and Adrian, who are your wish list people that you would love to sign on, in case anyone has any contacts here and wants to pass it along?
Sure. So the deadline for this letter is Friday, and we'll probably send it to USDA next week, but then continue to collect signatures as they come in and resend it over time as we get more signatures. So don't let that deter you. Absolutely, you can share it with others. It's totally public, and we'll send you kind of I think all of you should be on Friends of Thirst Advocacy list, so you should have gotten it through there. It was from me, so if you search my name and your email, it should come up. And for the second question, who would we ideally like to be on it? The most powerful stakeholder that USDA cares about, aside from maybe Sally's point about the meat and dairy industry, is school food service operators. So any of your districts or any other districts that are able to sign on, that's very powerful. Also, if you all are part of other associations, so for example, if you're part of like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Dietary Practice Group, ask them to sign on. If you are a member of the California School Nutrition Association or part of its policy group, ask CSNA to sign on. Those state SNA chapters have a huge amount of influence as well as, of course, and the federal SNA too, which we're asking, but they probably won't sign on to this letter. So yeah, hope that answers the question. And thanks. I think a lot of you guys are on it already. I recognize some of your school districts from it. So thank you so much for supporting it.
Great. Well, we are over time. Thank you all so much for taking the time. And thank you, Adrian, Chloe, and Camille, for all of your support here. And we will see you in 2 weeks. We'll be talking about leadership and how we want to go beyond with this group and continue this stuff forward. So it'll be we have some really great guest speakers for that, and we're looking forward to it. All right. Have a great day, everyone.